I have seen greed wear many faces from behind the bench. Sometimes it comes dressed in a cheap suit, shaking with panic. Sometimes it walks in loud, arrogant, and foolish. And sometimes it sits perfectly still, wearing a calm smile, pretending to be a loving son, while his own mother sits 10 feet away wondering if he tried to end her life for a house. That was the case that made my courtroom fall silent. A 90-year-old woman named Ruth Coleman walked into my courtroom that morning with a cane in one hand and her daughter's arm in the other. She was small, fragile, and beautifully dressed in a pale blue church suit, the kind of outfit someone wears when dignity is all they have left to protect. But what I noticed first was not her age. It was her eyes. They were tired, yes, but they were not weak. And after years on the bench, believe me, I know the difference. Weak people collapse under pressure. Ruth Coleman had survived pressure her entire life. She had buried a husband, raised 3 children, worked cleaning jobs, hospital laundry rooms, and school cafeterias. She had bought a little 2-bedroom house in Georgia after 40 years of saving. That house was not just property to her. It was memory. It was sacrifice. It was proof that a black woman who had been underestimated her whole life had still managed to leave something behind. And sitting across from her was her youngest son, Marcus Coleman, 52 years old, clean shirt, polished shoes, calm face, too calm. That was the first thing that bothered me. I have learned that when elderly parents bring their own children into court, the child usually comes in one of 2 ways, defensive or ashamed. Marcus was neither. He sat there like a man waiting for a misunderstanding to be corrected, like this entire hearing was beneath him. His mother, meanwhile, held a folded tissue in her lap and kept looking down whenever he moved. That detail stayed with me because fear in a courtroom does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a mother refusing to meet her own son's eyes. I opened the case file expecting a property dispute. That is what the paperwork suggested. Ruth Coleman claimed Marcus had pressured her to sign over her house. Marcus claimed his mother was confused, forgetful, and being influenced by other family members. I have heard that argument many times. Adult children often say an aging parent is confused when the parent stops obeying them. So I asked Ruth to speak first. Her voice was soft, but steady. "Your Honor," she said, "my son wanted my house." The room became quiet. Not silent yet, just quiet. The kind of quiet that tells you everyone senses pain before the facts even arrive. I asked her how long Marcus had been asking about the property. She said, "Since my doctor told me I shouldn't live alone no more." Marcus shifted slightly, small movement. But I saw it. The attorney beside him placed a hand on the table as if warning him not to react. That interested me. Ruth continued. She explained that Marcus had started visiting more often after learning her house was fully paid off. At first, he brought groceries, fixed a loose cabinet, drove her to appointments. To outsiders, he looked like a caring son, but then the conversations changed. He began asking about deeds, life insurance, bank accounts, whether her will had been updated. And then, according to Ruth, he started saying things no mother wants to hear. "Mama, you're too old to make decisions. Mama, people are going to take advantage of you. Mama, just sign the house to me and I'll protect it." I watched Marcus carefully while she spoke. No sadness, no discomfort, no anger either. Just stillness. That kind of stillness can be dangerous. Not always, but often enough that I pay attention to it. Some people remain calm because they are innocent. Others remain calm because they have practiced appearing innocent. Then Ruth said something that changed the temperature in the room. One night, he brought me tea. I looked up from the file. Her daughter, Angela, tightened her hand around Ruth's shoulder. Marcus blinked once. Ruth continued slowly. He said it would help me sleep. I drank some. Not all, just some. The courtroom went still now. She told us that within minutes she felt dizzy, heavy, confused. She said her hands would not move right. Her speech became slurred. She remembered Marcus standing near her kitchen table with papers spread out in front of him. That was when I interrupted. "What kind of papers?" Ruth's voice trembled for the first time. "House papers." And then, silence. I have presided over cases involving financial abuse of elderly parents, and I can tell you something most people do not understand. It rarely begins with violence. It begins with dependence, a ride to the doctor, a grocery bag, favor, a reminder that no one else will help. Then slowly, love becomes control. That was what I suspected here, but suspicion is not evidence. And Marcus knew that. His attorney stood and argued that Ruth was elderly, medically fragile, and likely misunderstood what happened. He said Marcus had only brought herbal tea because his mother complained of insomnia. He said the property documents were part of estate planning. I have heard beautiful words used to cover ugly intentions many times. I turned to Marcus. Did you bring your mother tea that night? Yes, Mom. Did you bring property documents? Yes, Mom. Did you ask her to sign anything? I asked her to review them. That answer was too clean, not false necessarily, but polished. I asked, at night? He said, that was when I was available. The gallery stirred slightly. I did not need to look to know what people were thinking. A 52-year-old man bringing property papers to his 90-year-old mother at night, along with tea that allegedly made her dizzy, does not look innocent to ordinary people. But courtrooms do not run on looks. They run on proof. And Marcus appeared to understand that very well. Then Angela Coleman took the stand. Angela was Ruth's oldest daughter, a nurse, and from the moment she sat down, I could tell she was furious but disciplined. That combination matters. Anger alone can distort testimony. Discipline gives it weight. She testified that Ruth called her around 10:40 that night, barely able to speak. She sounded drunk, Angela said, but my mother does not drink, not ever. Angela drove to the house immediately. When she arrived, she found Ruth sitting at the kitchen table, confused, with a pen in her hand. Property transfer documents were on the table. Marcus was there, and according to Angela, he looked irritated that she had arrived. I asked Angela what Marcus said. She looked directly at me. He said, "You always ruin everything." Marcus shook his head slightly, but again, he did not look shocked. He looked annoyed. That difference matters. Angela continued. She said she took the teacup from the table and later gave it to police after Ruth's doctor suggested possible sedation. At that point, Marcus finally leaned toward his attorney and whispered quickly. There it was. The first crack, because up until that moment, he believed the case was only his mother's word against his. But now there was a cup, possibly evidence, possibly nothing. Still, his body understood the danger before his mouth admitted it. The prosecutor requested permission to introduce medical records and lab findings related to Ruth's emergency room visit. Marcus's attorney objected, arguing chain of custody, relevance, and confusion over medication. Ruth was already prescribed. I listened carefully. A judge must never allow emotion to outrun procedure. Even when the facts feel ugly, the law must remain controlled. That is the burden of the bench. You may feel anger, but you cannot rule from anger. So I reviewed the records. Ruth had been taken to the emergency room that night. Her blood pressure had dropped. She was disoriented. Doctors found traces of a sedative in her system that was not part of her prescribed medication. The courtroom became tense as those words were read, sedative. Not proof of who gave it, but proof that Ruth's fear was not imagination. I looked at Marcus. For the first time, his calm expression changed, just slightly, his lips pressed together, his eyes lowered, not remorse. Calculation. I have seen that look before. It is the expression of a person not asking, how could this happen? But asking, how much do they know? Then Angela revealed something nobody expected. She said Ruth had recently installed a small kitchen camera after someone had been entering the house and moving papers when she was asleep. Ruth had not told Marcus about it. The entire courtroom shifted. Marcus looked up immediately. There it was. Real fear. Not grief, not confusion. Fear. Angela said the camera had recorded part of the kitchen that night. The prosecutor connected a laptop to the evidence screen. And as the courtroom lights dimmed, I remember looking at Ruth Coleman. She was staring straight ahead now, no longer looking down, no longer hiding. Her tissue was still in her hand, but her eyes had changed. She looked like a mother preparing to see the truth about her own child. And believe me, there are few things more painful than that. The video began with Ruth sitting at the kitchen table. Marcus stood near the counter. At first, nothing seemed dramatic. He poured tea. He placed it in front of her. He sat beside her with a folder. Then he leaned close and said something the courtroom speakers barely captured. But the microphone picked up enough. "You don't need to read all that, Mama. Just trust me." Ruth's hand trembled on the screen. Marcus pushed the pen closer. And then, just before the clip paused, his hand moved toward a small bottle near his jacket. The courtroom froze. Angela covered her mouth. Ruth closed her eyes. Marcus suddenly stood and said, "That doesn't show anything." But the problem was, it showed enough to raise the question everyone in that courtroom was now afraid to ask. What exactly had Marcus Coleman put in his mother's tea? I did not sleep well after that first hearing. Judges are trained not to carry cases home. We tell ourselves that once the robe comes off, the courtroom stays behind us. But that night, Ruth Coleman's face stayed with me. Her little hands folded over that tissue, her eyes fixed on the evidence screen. The way she closed them when Marcus leaned toward her on that video, a mother should never have to watch her own child become evidence against her. The next morning, the courtroom was full. Word had already moved through the courthouse that a 90-year-old woman's son may have drugged her over property. People pretend they come for justice, but sometimes they come because betrayal fascinates them. And I understood why. There is something deeply disturbing about a crime that begins inside a family kitchen. Marcus walked in differently that day. No relaxed smile, no polished confidence. He still wore a clean shirt and expensive shoes, but now his face carried a tightness he could not hide. He looked like a man trying to control the room after realizing the room had already turned against him. Ruth entered behind Angela. She looked tired, but she did not look broken. That mattered to me. The prosecutor resumed with the kitchen footage. This time, the video was slowed down. Frame by frame, we watched Marcus pour tea, place the cup in front of his mother, reach toward his jacket, and touch a small brown bottle near the edge of the counter. His attorney argued immediately. That bottle could be anything. He was right, could be anything. A judge cannot convict a person's character. Evidence must connect. That is where many people misunderstand court. Suspicion may feel certain, but law demands structure. Then the prosecutor called Detective Laura Bennett. He testified that when officers searched Marcus's vehicle, they found a prescription bottle containing a sedative medication. The label was not in Marcus's name. It belonged to a woman named Patricia Lane. I watched Marcus. When that name was spoken, he reacted. Just a flicker. But I saw it. The detective explained that Patricia Lane was Marcus's former girlfriend and a pharmacy technician. She had reported several pills missing weeks earlier, but had not known who took them. Marcus's attorney tried to object, tried to separate the facts, tried to make each piece look harmless alone, a bottle near the counter. A dizzy mother pouring documents, a sedative in Ruth's system, pills in Marcus's car. Individually, each fact had room for argument. Together, they formed a pattern. And patterns matter. In my years on the bench, I have learned that calculated people rarely leave one giant confession. They leave fragments, a strange visit, a convenient lie, a document prepared too early, a reaction too cold. And eventually, those fragments begin speaking louder than the defendant ever intended. Then the prosecutor introduced the property documents. They were not simple estate planning forms. They were transfer documents that would have given Marcus control over Ruth's house immediately, not after death. Immediately, the courtroom stirred when that became clear. Angela looked at her brother like she wanted to ask how he could sink that low. Ruth stared at the floor. Marcus finally spoke out. "I was trying to protect the house." I looked at him. "From whom?" He hesitated. That hesitation was louder than his answer. "From my siblings." Angela shook her head in disbelief, but Ruth did something that silenced everyone. She lifted her head and said quietly, "I was protecting it from you." The courtroom froze. Marcus stared at her. For the first time in this entire case, his mother had named the truth directly. No confusion, no fear, no hesitation, just truth. And I could see it wound him, not because he felt guilt, but because she had stopped playing the role he needed her to play. The prosecutor then asked permission to play the full remaining portion of the kitchen camera footage. I allowed it. The screen lit again. We watched Ruth grow weaker in the chair. Her head lowered slightly. Her fingers moved slowly over the papers. Marcus stayed close, speaking softly. "You're tired, Mama. Just sign this one line." Ruth whispered, "I want Angela." Marcus's face changed on the video, only for a second. He leaned closer. "You call Angela for everything. She doesn't care about you like I do." That sentence struck me deeply. Manipulators do not simply ask for control. They isolate first. They convince the victim that everyone else is dangerous, selfish, or absent. Then they present themselves as the only safe person left. Marcus was not protecting Ruth. He was cornering her. The footage continued. Ruth pushed the papers away weakly. "I don't want to sign tonight." Marcus sat back. And then the man in that video became someone very different from the son he had pretended to be in my courtroom. His voice lowered. "You know what happens if I walk away? You'll be alone in that house until somebody finds you." A gasp moved through the gallery. Angela began crying. Ruth on the video stared at him with confusion and fear. Then Marcus pushed the pen back toward her. "Sign it." That was the viral moment, not loud, not explosive, but horrifying, because the courtroom had just watched a grown son use his mother's fear of dying alone to steal her home. I looked at Marcus in real time. He was staring at the screen like he hated the image more than the act. Then the final clip played. Angela's headlights appeared through the kitchen window. Marcus saw them. His entire posture changed. He grabbed the bottle from the counter, shoved papers into the folder, and said sharply, "Why did you call her?" Ruth's voice was barely audible. "I was scared." Then the video ended. Nobody moved. Even I took a moment before speaking, because judges are human too. We wear robes, we follow rules, we maintain order. But there are moments when the facts enter the room so clearly that silence becomes the only respectful response. Marcus's attorney requested a recess. I denied it. Marcus suddenly stood. "Mama," he said, turning toward Ruth. "I'm sorry." The timing was revealing. He had not apologized when she described dizziness, not when the sedative was mentioned, not when the property documents were shown, only after the video exposed him. That is not remorse. That is survival. Ruth looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "You weren't sorry when I was sitting at that table." That sentence broke something open in the courtroom. Angela sobbed quietly. A juror wiped her eyes. Marcus lowered his head, but I did not mistake that posture for humility. Some people bow their heads only when the world finally sees them clearly. He began begging then. "Mama, please. I made a mistake. I was scared. I didn't want to lose everything." Ruth's voice stayed soft. "You were willing to lose me." And there it was. The truth of the entire case. Patri was never the most valuable thing Marcus tried to take. He tried to take his mother's safety, her independence, her dignity, her right to decide what happened to the life she built. I delivered my ruling with the evidence clear before me. The property transfer attempt was void. Ruth retained full ownership and control of her home. Protective orders were issued. The matter was referred for criminal investigation based on suspected poisoning, elder abuse, financial exploitation, and attempted fraud. Marcus was ordered away from Ruth's residence and financial affairs immediately. As I spoke, Marcus kept shaking his head, but Ruth did not look at him anymore. She looked forward. That may sound small, but it was not. For a woman who had spent the hearing afraid to meet her son's eyes, looking forward was an act of freedom. Before we adjourned, I addressed Marcus directly. You did not make one mistake. You made a series of choices. You chose the tea. You chose the documents. You chose the hour. You chose your mother's weakness as your opportunity. And when a person uses love as a weapon against an elderly parent, the court must respond with absolute seriousness. He had no answer. Then I looked at Ruth. Mrs. Coleman, this court recognizes your right to your home, your dignity, and your voice. She nodded once, just once. But the entire courtroom felt it. Afterward, as deputies escorted Marcus out, he turned back again. Mama, please forgive me. Ruth did not answer immediately. She held Angela's hand, stood slowly, and looked at him with a sadness I will never forget. I already prayed for you, she said, but you can't come home. That was justice in its purest form, not revenge, not hatred, a boundary. A 90-year-old mother finally choosing herself after a lifetime of choosing everyone else. I have sentenced violent people who frightened me less than Marcus Coleman did, because violence announces itself. Greed inside a family often arrives smiling, carrying groceries, calling you mama, promising protection while preparing papers at the kitchen table. That case reminded me that elder abuse is not always loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it wears a son's face. Sometimes it offers tea, and every time I think of Ruth Coleman, I remember her final walk out of my courtroom, slow, steady, holding her daughter's arm, still fragile, but no longer silent, because the law cannot give back every wound a person suffers. It cannot erase the betrayal of a child. But sometimes, if the truth reaches the light in time, it can still protect what remains. And in Ruth's case, what remained was her home, her dignity, and the courage to never open that door to him again.